My childhood best friend, Brian, and I fell out of touch shortly after college, and I'd only see him through short glimpses of social media posts over the past few years. He'd been a respectable mathematician at the college in Massachusetts he taught at, and though unmarried, he seemed to be generally happy as far as I could gather. A man of math and science, logic and levity. I first thought his account had been hacked into when his posts began to shift from clever musings about scientific pioneers and math-related puzzles to bizarre and almost religious rantings before he disappeared over a month ago. Brian would typically post comments about historic events of that day, honoring Marie Curie or notifying a very select few about the upcoming Abel Prize. His other, more casual posts would document wine pairings with dinners and an occasional shot of owls and other birds he photographed as a hobby. His posts were short, witty, intelligent, and always a bit tongue-in-cheek, using double entendres and a few clever jabs at the political or social figure of his choosing. But they became cryptic and confusing before people became concerned. It was as if a switch was flipped, and I'll avoid sharing too much of his private life, but I will show you a few posts to demonstrate the shift. September 22nd, 2017. 5-room house puzzle. Can you cross each wall using a single line? With a picture of 2 rows, one with 2 columns over a row with 3 shorter ones. One person got it correct after a half-dozen wrong. One eliciting Brian's calling the fellow had 1 room short of a 5-room house. October 1st, 2017. Invention, my dear friends, is 93% perspiration, 6% electricity, 4% evaporation, and 2% butterscotch ripple, accompanied by a photo of a bowl of ice cream on a picnic table with dense trees in the background. October 18th, 2017. Personal perfect project. A photo of him in overalls holding a hammer building a wooden structure. A few pictures of him sawing lumber and affixing doors to frames. November 3rd, 2017. The 9-room paradox. 10 weary, footsore travelers, all in a woeful plight, sought shelter at a wayside inn one dark and stormy night. 9 rooms, no more, the landlord said. Have I to offer you, to each of 8, a single bed? But the 9th must serve for 2. The poem that continued on was from the late 1800s and presented a riddle as to how 10 men all seemed to end up with their own room. 2 people answered correctly, but Brian didn't reply. December 7th, 2017. God hides in plain sight in the fold. Everything has been lying beneath the surface, but it's right there. To the response of laughing Dawkins memes and questions of whether he was okay. Some were from his colleagues at university. And it became clear he'd been absent from work for some time, which was disconcerting. December 11th, 2017. Seeing an old friend today. With a strange photo that looked like an endless spiral of blurry framed squares descending inward that, well, was a bit creepy and beyond confusing. The replies to the post were mostly from the following weeks, from concerned friends and family asking anyone with information to contact them, as well as hopeful wishes from his other friends, even prayers, which normally would have been ironic had it not been for his recent reference to God. And there was nothing but silence on his end. I texted, Called and emailed him, but nothing garnered a response. I just hoped he'd show up soon. Perhaps via an apology post after a vacation, or on a friend's page who'd found him at a clinic recovering from some sort of existential breakdown or midlife crisis. That changed 4 days ago, when I'd received the cryptic SMS message from Brian's number. There was no text, just a blurry picture of a hand holding an open wallet. And chills crept up my spine as I squinted, realizing it was mine. My driver's license and my credit cards in the slotted pockets. I checked. My wallet was still in my jeans, and there was no way Brian could have gotten the photo without breaking into my apartment and photographing it in my sleep, which was beyond unlikely. Furthermore, the wallet was held in front of the sun-bleached wood of a structure I recognized from my past. It was his parents' old barn in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where we'd played as kids, nearly 200 miles away. Flooding memories of getting splinters from shimmying up wooden beams and falling onto haystacks to dodge hurled potatoes made me smile. I hadn't been there in over 25 years, and the nostalgia pooled tears of relief over my eyes with the realization that Brian was likely okay. I texted him back a few times with inquiries and tried calling, but heard no response and grew concerned once more. I finally decided that come the weekend, I'd drive down there to try to put my worries to rest. Skyscrapers grew further apart from each other as the skies opened on the Southwest Drive. On the road, I planned ways to address him if he'd truly lost it. He was one of my oldest friends, and he had contacted me before all others for some reason or another. Perhaps a stroke had affected his brain and motor functions. I just needed to make sure I at least checked on the one lead I had in case he needed my help. As the swaying stalks of wheat and corn blurred past through the framed car window, memories mixed with a déjà vu I had not felt in ages. The last time I'd been this far into Pennsylvania was at his father's funeral just a year after his mother had passed, and though Brian had been smiles and polite conversation, his eyes had shown he was beyond devastated by their loss. As the GPS guided me down windy roads and past Amish territory, a culture of which neither Brian nor his parents shared, I began to recognize the curling perimeter of trees and rolling lawn of their farm and residence. Sure enough, Brian's car was in the driveway with his college bumper sticker as well as a very tall stack of wooden planks, 12 feet high and maybe 8 deep. And my mind jumped to the personal project Brian mentioned with his photo of holding a hammer on his page. I felt a peculiar unease as I knocked on the house doors and windows, finding them all locked before heading to the barn. The barn door was slightly ajar, and upon glancing in, I was dumbstruck. Within the walls of the vast wooden interior of the barn stood a newer wooden structure of nearly equal size. It was as if Brian had decided to build a slightly smaller barn inside of the barn, with ceilings, sturdy walls, and flooring, as well as one single door on the left side. Hundreds of schematics and plans littered the floor in stacked and crumpled piles, frantically crinkled and scribbled into with frenzied notes. Words and numbers were scribbled down in equations and formulas I can't pretend to have understood. Fractions, angles, and spirals drawn hastily across large pages of newsprint. I called out Brian's name to no response and glanced through more of the notes, realizing he had indeed likely lost his mind. There were stacks of black and white printouts of cubes within cubes, of a spiral over squares I'd recognized as the golden ratio, and notes of numbers crossed out with only the number 9 circled at the bottom, surrounded by an underlined 90-degree angle. Images of 3x3 grids and unfolded cubes were crossed out as if proven incorrect with thick black marker. Other printouts of the 9 words of Norse mythology and of biblical passages of the movement of God and Dante's 9 circles of hell. There were wiki pages on Egyptian history and a group of gods named Enid, as well as random pages from numerology, which I completely refused to believe the Brian I knew would even humor reading, let alone print out. If it wasn't for his tall, looping cursive I used to tease him about, I would have assumed this was the work of someone else entirely. I called out loudly
Brian?
Once more before noticing the blueprints. Plans for a rectangle, nearly a square itself, comprised of 9 perfect squares of varying size. I remembered from algebra many years ago, and the term, stuck on the precipice of my mind, finally tumbled forth. A perfect rectangle. 2, 5, 7, 9, 16, 25, 28, 33, 36, marked the boxes within the box on the diagram, and underneath was a blueprint scaled up to 138 by 122, and I realized these numbers might correspond to the massive structure before me.
Brian? Are you in here?
I shouted at the large building within the walls of the barn. I approached the strange construction, opening the door of the entrance to peek inside. Vertical beams of cedar stretched between the wooden floor and tall ceiling of the empty room. One door was on the wall to the right. I fully entered the room that seemed to be about 50 square feet and felt a cold chill on my skin, confused at how an additional wall of insulation from the winter air could cause the temperature to drop.
Brian, are you in here?
I called loudly, my voice echoing flatly off the wooden walls. I heard a steady humming once inside that reminded me of a fan, but the source seemed to be coming from further within the structure. I continued on, trying to fight off the uneasy feeling welling in my stomach. I walked further to the next door's knob, turning it slowly and pushing it open to be assaulted by a horrible stench that filled the darkness. I removed my phone and switched on the light before stepping in, confused at the feeling of pressure building like growing marbles inside of my ears. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the decaying body on the floor, the white bone peeking through the blotchy, necrotic flesh that was once a face.
Oh, no, Brian,
I called out, walking slowly to the side of his body, covering my nose with my jacket's sleeve and noticing the matching color. He was wearing the same jacket, his stained with the noxious fluids of putrefaction. I stared for a few moments at the decaying corpse and realized every single article of clothing, his jeans, his tan work boots, and even his tousled hair on tissue paper skin was the same as my own. I kneeled by the putrid body and picked up the wallet by his side, and it was my wallet, the one Brian had sent me a photo of. Every detail was undeniably the same, even the wrinkled $20 bills with folds in the same places, marked with identical serial numbers. My license and the scuff marks on my credit cards, they were identical in every way, every nick, scratch, and crease. I stared at the rotted body, cringing as I gazed into the horrible, lipless scream of a mouth, able to make out the fillings in the teeth that matched my very own. I shivered as horror and madness dripped from my lizard brain, when the feeling of immediate danger forced me to my shaky legs and screamed at me to leave. I ran back to the door I'd entered from, half expecting it to be locked, and beyond relieved it wasn't. I spilled back into the first chamber, claustrophobia gripping my throat as I ran to the exit and pushed the door open in confusion, as any sense of relief was replaced by dread. The door opened, to an adjacent room of identical structure, wooden in entirety with only a door to the left and the one behind me I'd entered from. I ran to the other door, opening it fast and wheezing with hyperventilation in my peaking confusion. I was in another identical room. It was impossible. The rooms couldn't have been shifted or rearranged. The doors were framed and securely constructed in place. Even if somehow that had been the case, the entrance I came in through was less than 2 meters from the wall of the barn itself. I paced back and forth, telling myself it was a dream, almost laughing because this simply wasn't possible, and I tossed some pocket change onto the pine floor. I continued to the next door, noticing the springs on the hinges that closed them automatically for the first time. I opened the door to find an identical room yet again, and paused as my brain tried to understand the structure I was in to no avail. I backtracked to the previous room to find the change missing, and I laughed loudly as madness dissolved the rationale that had been encoded for decades into my brain. I pounded on the sturdy pine walls with my fist, illuminated by the light of the phone in my other hand, and I saw that the signal was present, but I was unable to make a call. I then noticed the time. 9:12 a.m., and wondered how I could have been in this strange structure for over half a day in what felt like under 20 minutes. The shocking confusion of how I'd become trapped slipped slowly away as I peered down at the date in the corner of the phone's screen, and I blinked in exclamation before sliding to the floor, processing the displayed date. December 11th, 2017 was glowing in a thin white font, not January 20th, 2018, the day I drove here. That date was familiar, and it wasn't until I opened the social app to check Brian's page to read his last post that unease wrenched my stomach. Posted 15 minutes ago. Seeing an old friend today. I read above a now clear photo of my collapsed body. And I heard the sound of a door closing from another room.